Well, Duane, I was born April 2nd, 1889, in Salt Lake City, Utah, and about where KSL is at the present time on Social Hall Avenue.
Were you really?
I was really.
Well, what was it at that time? Was it?
It was Social Hall Avenue, and there was a series of little cottages there. This was I remember now. I said 1889.
Yeah. Well, you had a home. Yeah.
Was that 18?
I was born
Uh huh.
to my parents, Richard Cardall, who came from Birmingham, England at the age of 16, a convert to the church, and my mother, Anna Elizabeth, Anna Elizabeth Petersen, who was born in Aarhus, Denmark, and who also came at the age of 16 as a convert to the church. This,
Where did they meet?
I don't know. I Salt Lake City. I know who introduced them.
Who was
My father's sister, whose name was Lottie Everett, Lottie Cardall Everett.
Well, now, they were very fine. You were a friend of my father's aunt or sister, Aunt Lenny Harrington, and my grandmother. You know my grandmother Taylor, but my grandmother John Taylor's wife came from a marvelous family. We have a book of her, what do you call it, very fine family. And not one of the family came for a long time afterwards. They didn't want her to become a Mormon, you see. And they were very, very fine people. And it read my grandmother's family. I forget the name, but I had the book of it. And now, what was it you asked about my?
Well, I'm asking how his parents met each other.
You asking how
One came from Denmark.
I don't know, except that my father's sister introduced them. This
was
we
this
do.
one that knew my father's mother. I don't know whether my father knew this woman, but my Aunt Lenny was a very close friend, a very, what do you call it, the sister of her mother, of his mother.
Well, my father's profession.
Or my father.
What did he do?
My father's profession was a cook. He worked at the various restaurants in Salt Lake City, the old Royal Cafe, Gallagher's Cafe, the European Cafe. I think they're all out of business today and have been for many, many years. And his folks, his parents never emigrated to Utah, but all of his brothers and sisters except one came over. He had, let's see, he had Aunt Lizzie, Aunt Lottie, Aunt Hannah, a brother George, a brother John, and a brother Joe. The brother Joe was the one that he was a professional entertainer in England and stayed there. He didn't come
Cedar.
over. And we were being a cook. The wages were low. The hours were long. $2 a day for a 12-hour day, 7 days a week. My dad was unskilled in everything. He could neither read nor write. He could barely sign his name. And consequently, at times he'd get very despondent, apparently not being able to know unless someone else read the newspaper to him and read magazines to him. He was in the dark all the time. So I sometimes think that that's the reason the old gentleman would take to drink. He'd take it. He would saturate himself and forget everything. So he wasn't the best provider in the world. Uh, as a kid, I grew up in semi-poverty. I had everything that a kid could have. I had measles and the mumps and diphtheria and the whole works. And
Well, but tell
I
about
found
your
that,
mother. Tell about your mother. She was a
I'll
teacher.
get to
She
it.
spoke through
I'll
you.
get to it.
Oh, excuse me.
I have to stay with one till I get through with it. Then uh, he used to work nights too, all night long. Sometimes he has a swing shift. We worked from early morning at night, or from morning till evening, and then from evening till morning. And some of these restaurants stayed open all night at particular times. But my dad loved these kids very, very much. But as I say, not being home, only being working 12 hours a day, then coming home, the time he got home, there was another 2 or 3 hours elapsed. He didn't have much time for his children. Couldn't have much time. So I guess mother then had to take charge. And I want to tell you that what my father lacked, my mother made up for in every way. She had all of the virtues that you could think of: patience, love, understanding. Uh, well, just a perfect woman, I would say. My mother. I have everything. My regard for my mother is, I regard her almost as an angel, because I think back. Now, from the time I started the school, from the time I started the school, uh, at the age of 6, until I quit, I had gone through 7 schools. By the time I was 12, and by this time I just finished the 5th grade. I, I just finished the 5th grade, or ending the 6th grade, and I went to work at the Walker Brothers dry goods store on January 1st, 1901, and I turned 12 years of age on April 2nd of that same year. So, but my formal schooling stopped at that point.
Why did you go to so many different schools?
Well, it was cheaper to move than to pay rent. We moved from one place. I went to the Grant School, to the Sumner School, to the uh, Hamilton School, to the Wasatch School, to the training school at what was the first building on the university campus, the very first building on the university campus.
Douglas?
Went to training school. Then from there to the Jefferson, which is on, I think it's on 8th or 9th East now, just below 4th South. Then to the Oakwood, where I quit. And the reason I quit, of course, there were 2 reasons, but the one reason I quit at that particular time, I had a fight on the school ground. Now, I'm a little skinny kid, and I wasn't pugilistic in any way. But in some way, I got into a fight with a man I remember this very well, by the name of Maurice Stiefel.
How do you say?
Maurice Stiefel.
Maurice?
Maurice Stiefel. He was a Jewish boy. And apparently, I was so wrought up, we were pushed into each other by people. We were pushed each into the other. So I cut his lip in some way with my fist, I guess. And the teacher came down and hauled me up to the principal. Now, the principal's name was McCoy. You had him.
Oh.
And they insisted that I go in and apologize to the teacher and to the principal. I went up to tell my mother about it. And at that particular time, Dad was out of work. And this opportunity came to go to work as a cash boy at Walker Brothers dry goods store. You didn't have to go to school in those days. It wasn't compulsory. So they could exploit child labor all they wanted. So I went to work as a cash boy, $2.50 a week. $2.50.
How old were you?
In which I took every cent home to mother. Every cent. My sisters were working, and they did the same thing. We never thought that the idea of keeping a penny didn't enter our mind. Now, on Saturday night, we had to work till 10 o'clock at Walker Brothers Dry Goods. So we reported at 7:45 in the morning, and we quit when we got through at night. Sometimes I'd go home 7, 8, or 9 o'clock because we were delivering and had to clean up afterward. A cash boy at $2.50 a week. And on Saturdays, it was 10 o'clock. But we had an hour off between 6 and 7, or 7 and 8, I remember. And there was a Morrison had a meat pie shop on the corner under the basement of the bank on the corner of First South and Main Street, where they sold pies for a nickel apiece. My mother would give me 10 cents. And with the other cash boys, we'd hightail it up from Third South on Main Street to First South on Main Street, go down in the basement. They had kidney pie, pork pie, beef pie, and all of the trimmings that go with it as far as gravy was concerned. And we would go down there and we'd get a pork pie or a beef pie or a kidney pie, those little Morrison meat pie, put some of that sauce on it. And that was the week's highlight in your life. That was one of the week's highlight in your life. Now, I want to tell you about the love of a kid for a parent. I had one of these dimes in Easter time came around. I went up Main Street, and I think it was a Keeley store there, just above Third South. And in the window, they displayed a little chocolate egg, about the size of an ostrich egg, not an ostrich, but a goose egg. It was bigger than a hen's egg, with a little opening at the end, and you looked in there, and there was a picture of something. It cost 10 cents. Well, now, it was whether I should buy that for my mother or go up and get 2 meat pies. Well, I thought my mother loved this. So I go in, I forgo my meat pies, and I spend 10 cents to bring home to my mother that chocolate. I'll never forget how she looked. She just looked at me and shook her head. Then she grabbed me. She grabbed me and held me close. I'll never forget that moment. Never. So these are little things. You could go on and on and on, of course, and talk about this.
How old were you at this
Now,
time? 13.
how long did I work at Walker's?
Yeah.
Let's see. 1901. I must have been around 19. I was 1901. I'm 12. I think when I'm 15, I go to work at the Conwagon. So it'd be around 1904, 1905, because I went through the Depression in 1907, got paid in scrip by the Conwagon during the Depression of 1907. It was a big one. It was a credit depression. Couldn't get your money out of the bank. They paid you in scrip. And all over the town, they would accept that.
What was the Conwagon?
Consolidated Wagon and Machine Company. It was the largest. They advertised themselves as being the largest retail implement house in the world. They had 36 branches in Utah, Idaho, and Nevada. And they had it was a wonderful place. I almost worshiped the general manager, George G. Odell. He was a wonderful fellow. And I went in first as an elevator boy, run up the elevator. Then they put me in the mailing room, and I went from the mailing room to a bookkeeper. And I worked from then from 1910, 1911. I was there for 6 or 7 years. And I went right up. By the time I was 18, I think I quit them. I'd been made assistant bookkeeper.
How much were you making?
Huh?
How much were you making at that time?
When I went over, they paid me $6 a week. I went from 2.5 at Walker's to $6 a week there. When I quit, I was making $65 a month.
Was that comparable to what? Was it a good?
Oh, that $65 was about what any of them were getting in that bracket of service, that clerical bracket.
Could you? How could you live on that?
$65 a month. Well, we'd go to the butcher shop, and they'd give us all the liver. They didn't sell it. You could have all the liver you wanted. They'd give you a soup bone. You take the soup bone home. And Mother, we were raised on soups. My mother was a cook that knew how to cook Danish food. And we had Danish noodles and Danish dumplings and what they call seal soup, which was sweet soup. We had kål, which is a ham with a lot of rice and parsley and stuff ground up in it. Very nourishing. I think that's the reason I'm living so long. It's what I had when I was a kid, not what I'm eating now. Anyway, there's so many things that would come into your mind that seem inconsequential, you see. But to me, they amounted to something at that particular time. Now, when I worked at the Con Wagon, I met your grandma while I was working at the Con Wagon. And that's an interesting incident. I was going, we were, I had a chum by the name of Edmund P.M. He was 14, I was 12 when we met, and we were close friends until he died. I spoke at his funeral when he was some 80 years of age. But we would go together at the old YMCA. The YMCA at that particular time is where the federal building is now, on the corner of First South and State Street. And we used to go there, and they had a library. And I used to go there and read all the time. And then they'd have basketball games. The schools would have their basketball games there. So one night I was there, went with Ed. Is it over?
No.
I went with Ed, and he left me. We went to YMCA together. He left me. So when the game was over, he came in, and he had two girls with him. This girl and her cousin, Emma Taylor. And she had a little long braids toward her back, came clear down to her, the braid of her hair clear down to her waist. And she looked to me like she was about 12 or 14 years of age.
Emma.
No, you. I don't remember what Emma had. I don't remember. It was you because you were Ed's girl. And they lived on First West. Well, we walked them home we walked them down First South to Second, at that time it was called Second West. I think it was First West now. It was Second West. And I stopped in front of with Emma at her home, which was a half a block this side of where she lived. Ed went on up with her, and I waited till he came back. And I said, "What are you trying to do, Ed? Rob the cradle?" That was my future wife.
And you were you were 14 at this time?
No. We're up around 16, 17. But I still worked at the Con Wagon.
Uh-huh.
I told you I was 17, 16, 17. I think I was 17 when I met her.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure I was. Pretty close to 18. Oh, I had my 18th birthday. I remember it, right after I met her. And she had her 16th birthday.
I had one.
Your 16th birthday. I was invited to your birthday party. Your 16th birthday.
No, that was later.
Well, anyway, I was left to that. This was after that basketball. So, but while I was at the Con Wagon, the Consolidated Wagon Machine Company, I better call it. While I was courting Meryl, she had a friend by the name of Eileen Haley visit her from Tennessee. Her father was interested with her father in buying and selling horses for the government. Eileen Haley's father. And so Ringling Brothers Circus was in town. Ed said to me, "Ray, let's take the girls to the circus." And Ed was employed by his brother as a plumber in the building that was being erected at that time. It's still there on the corner of 2nd East and 2nd South on the northwest corner. And he quit work at 5 o'clock, but I didn't quit work till 6. Well, he said, "Why don't you come on up and get dressed a little early? And we'll get out and take the girls to lunch." Well, I didn't have the kind of money he made. He was making $5 a day, and I was making $60 a month. Oh, by the way, my mother had died. I was over 18 by this time. By the time Eileen Haley, I was over 18. Yeah, because my mother had died by this time.
What about your father? Was he?
My father died sometime after mother. I can't quite recall. But anyway, when I could tell you about mother's trip, there was a lot of things in there that would take reams and reams and reams to tell you about it. But you see, when you go over 87 years and you go back into a crowded childhood, Duane, you're living every minute. Something's going to happen, and you just can't. And they're important as far as you're concerned. But I don't know. You don't. Well, anyway, Well, I was working at the corn wagon, and this night that I speak of, the Ringling Brothers circus in town, Ed wanted to take it to the circus. So I said, well, I didn't have any money. So I went to the assistant secretary and treasurer, Grant Hampton, and asked him if I could get an advance of $10. And he gave me an advance of $10. Well, I slipped out at 4:30. I went up to Ed's place, and we got dressed, went home. Then we went down and got the girl, so I didn't go back. And I was supposed to punch the clock at 6 o'clock. You punched in and you punched out. Well, the next morning, we took the girls to the circus. But the next morning, when I reported for work, I went to the cashier, uh, Chester Madsen. I remember his name well. And I said, Chester, I went out before 5 o'clock last night, and I didn't come back. Will you mark me out about 5 o'clock? So he wrote down on that strip, opposite my number, that I quit at 5 o'clock. Well, as I was going up the stairs that morning, there was a sort of an electric current went through the whole establishment. There was a peculiar feeling, and the people were whispering, they were talking. And as I passed Grant Hampton on the way down, he was coming down. I passed him on the way up. I said, Mr. Hampton, what's the problem? He said, the place was burglarized last night. And I said, oh, how much money did they get? Well, he said, not too much. But they said they opened Mr. Odell's personal box and got $95. So that day, they were having a watermelon bust on the roof of the building. And I went up there, and there was 3 boys up there, along with 2 others, that worked also at the Consolidated Light Machine Company. And the one name was Hall Meakin, the other's name was Joe Roy. And these two boys were up there, and we got to talking, and I said, did you know that the place was burglarized last night? No. I said, they got away with $95, and they broke into Mr. Odell's personal little strong box. Oh, I had George Odell had given me the combination to his safe. And in this safe, he kept his strong box. But apparently, when they went home that night, no one lost his safe. They could open the door without locking it. But I knew the combination. And because I had proofread his will with him several times. I proofread the will that George Odell left for his kids several times, and that was in this particular safe. But so I told him about this. Well, later on that afternoon, I was in the restroom, and the general manager, George Tudkel, come out and handed me my check. And he says, Ray, we're dispensing with your services. And I said, was it because of the stealing? He said, I didn't say so, did I? I told you we were reducing the force. Well, then I learned that there were 9 others under suspicion that were fired. So I tried to get a job, and I couldn't get a job. And one day, I was up tending a little store that my sister and brother-in-law run on East 2nd South, and up comes the old Black Mariah. That's the patrol wagon. And they came in, and I had to lock the place up, went down. I was given the 3rd degree. I'll never forget it. And they said, you did everything to cover your tracks, didn't you? You went out ahead of time, but you stayed in the place, didn't you? You stayed in, and then you went into the safe when you opened it. This is what they were telling me I did. And finally, they kept on, and the lights were in my eyes all the time. I couldn't see them. All I could see was this light. This was a kid, 18 years old. And finally, I remember I threw my head down on the chip table, and I said, what do you want me to do? Say I took it when I didn't? But for a while there, I thought maybe I had. I really thought maybe I had done it and didn't know about it. Well, then I went away from there. I couldn't get a job. I had a job up at the Union Pacific Railroad Company offered to me, but they phoned down to the Crown Wagon. They said I'd been fired under suspicion. Finally, I couldn't get a job, so I went down to the Jensen Creamery Company on West 2nd South.
How did you get her away from Ed?
I didn't get her; she got me. She won't believe this. But I went down. We had a party at her place. This is no kidding. I thought she was Ed's girl, my chum's girl, and I wasn't going to cut him out. Now this is true. I thought it would be terrible. But this party, there were several. I don't know who was there. I know there was Ed and several other boys and girls. And around 11 o'clock at night, the party broke up. We had a little hallway. They all filed out the hallway. We're all going out. And she pushed me to one side. And as Ed went out the door, I was going out the door. She closed the door and took me back into this room with her mother. And I stayed there for another 45 minutes, I guess, talking to her. Then telephone calls went back and forth. I eased Ed out, I guess. He didn't like it very much, but he fell in love with the girl across the street, Lucretia Evans. And that fixed that all up.
He married her?
Huh? He married her. Oh, that was a funny thing. Meryl was out of town. She'd gone down to California. I don't know how this happened. I happened to run across Cree, some of the girls with her, and a boy. And they wanted to go somewhere. And I said, well, I better phone Ed. I don't want to go without Ed. So I phoned Ed. And I told him who I was with, Christian Miles and so forth. He says, oh, Slim, not again. I'll never forget over the telephone, oh, Slim. I was called Slim. Oh, Slim, not again. I weighed 130 pounds. So these are little things. These are little things that you wouldn't want to.
Who was?
Now,
This man, all the women were after, all the girls were after.
Why?
I don't know. That's what he tells you.
who?
He tells you the story.
The girls are after me? No. I never went out with a girl that went after you. This is true, and you know it.
He doesn't tell this story.
But I have to tell it that I said when I was hooked, she threw the bait. I grabbed it. I've been hooked ever since. And I've never felt bad about it. I've been always very happy that I was hooked. But I really don't think if she hadn't shut that door that night, that I'd have had the nerve to cut my friend out. I really don't.
Why wouldn't you have had the nerve?
Because you feel loyal to a friend. And he was your girl. You were his girl.
How old were you at that time?
About 15 then.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, he did. Well, I quit the con wagon because I just felt they hadn't treated me right, and under just a little piff, I went to work for the Salt Lake Hardware. I only worked
Over up by the viaduct.
for Salt Lake Hardware. No, they had a retail store on Second South where the Capitol Theater is now,
Oh,
right there. And all I had to do was someone priced the invoices. I extended the invoices to total. Another fellow did the same thing. We compared the invoices, he a duplicate, he a virtual, me a duplicate, to see whether or not we got the same answer. I was always ahead of this guy. I was waiting for him. Maybe 15, 20 minutes. Always waiting for him to get up. And he'd been there a long time. And I don't know, he made some complaint about I wasn't accurate or so forth. So when I got my first paycheck, they fired me. But I was always waiting for this guy to get a pile I could add. I could add 2 or 3 columns at a time at those times. It was no trick at all for me to add 2 figures at a time. That was not. Sometimes if there were only 4 or 5 items, 4 figures. I could see them, put the total down. It I could seem like I could see words.
What are you talking about now?
But then I went down. I got a job down at the Cornell Oil Company. That was very interesting down there. Got a job down at the Cornell Oil Company as what they call a sales sheet writer. That was writing up the sales that were made. And by the way, there wasn't a service station in town at that time. They drove down, what few automobiles there were in Salt Lake City, drove down to the Continental Oil Company on about 5th West and 2nd South.
Say what?
Drove down to the Continental Oil Company, 5th West and 2nd South, and they filled their gas tanks out of 10-gallon milk cans.
oh, really?
They had the milk cans there. They didn't have pumps. And they drive down there. And they told me when I first went in there, these sheets were, so gross. Big ones. You'd write down here, over here, you'd had codes, like 1402 would be headlight oil. 1408 would be axle grease, and so on and so forth. And as the sales were made to various places, they'd make a sales ticket out. They had a very primitive way, without adding machines or anything at that time. Everything was done by pen and ink, of keeping records. And my job was to see that the code number went down to one place, that the amount was placed in the amount column, and that the customer was put in the amount column. And then the sales sheet analysis writer over here, he would go down, he was doing the same thing, only he was just putting code numbers down, the amounts. And I'd have to total his total and my total would have to agree. That's what they told me when I went in there. That if I could keep up 6 of these sheets a day, I would be able to keep it up. When I quit, I was writing 16 sheets a day, and I was slinging ink like nobody's business. I could add very fast, and we didn't have an adding machine. They wouldn't let you have an adding machine. Wouldn't let you have an adding machine. They did have typewriters. But one day I got so nervous on this cockeyed thing, and I remember George Smith, the office manager, came over to me and he said something, and I was writing. I'll never forget that. All of a sudden, something exploded in me. I took that pen and I hit it, and I can see that pen wiggling back forth. That pen point went into the wood, and that thing swayed back and forth like a tree in the wind. And I said, take this job and do something with it. And I walked out.
What was that for?
Because I quit. And I was rooming with the head bookkeeper on Second South in an apartment between 4th and 15th. And he came in and he said, they want you back. At the, they can't fill your job right now. He says, it's going to take 2 or 3 people. They want you back.
Well, that's
I'm not
so
going
much
back. He said, you know that you're the only person that ever quit the Continental Company that had the opportunity of going back. I said, I don't want it. I'm not going back. And I didn't. But I got a job immediately with Fairbanks Morse Company. While I worked with Fairbanks Morse Company, we got married. I believe it was in 1911.
Grandpa, I was gonna ask, if you had 12 years of schooling was all,
5.
5 years of schooling.
Yeah.
Okay, how did you pick up all this addition? So
I guess it came natural. I don't.
just came to
Well,
you.
you learned how to write during those 5 years
Huh?
of school. You learned how to
Right.
add and subtract and read and write.
Well, by the time I got 5 years in school, I had a pretty good memory. I can recite you Paul Revere right now. There's 21 or 30, 21, 25 words.
he loves.
I bet I can recite right now
Should have had schooling.
40 or 50 poems, one after another. Yes.
Well, John can too. John,
Yeah, John Kemp.
John's the same way.
I love poetry.
Uh-huh.
I love poetry.
All right.
And now,
Tell-
but you asked me how I found. I took out, but this other I was just a natural being shown the job by someone else. But I did take out an accounting course with LaSalle University Company when I quit the Fairbanks Morse Company to go to the Salt Lake Glass and Paint Company as office manager. And while there, I took out a course with the LaSalle Extension University on accounting. And I used to sit up when we lived over there on 7th Avenue till 2 o'clock in the morning to get my lessons in.
7th Avenue K.
Huh?
7th Avenue K.
7th Avenue between D and E Street on the south side of the street.
Did you buy that home?
No, we just rented it. Just rented it.
Okay, so you went from this Morris, what was the name of it?
Fairbanks Morris.
Fairbanks Morris, which was what kind of a company?
Well, I was, I had a good reputation there. When I quit there, they said to the man, all we ask you to do is to follow in Mr. Cardall's footsteps. So I had a pretty good reputation.
And then you went to Salt Lake Glass.
And then I went to Salt Lake Glass.
Then you started delivery service after?
No. Then after being with that, I went to the delivery service. I went to the Salt Lake Glass and Cake Company on July 1st, 1913. And I quit January 1st, 1921. In 1921, I went into business with a fellow named Nat Shepard, who was the brother of the general manager of the Salt Lake Glass and Cake Company, whose name was Harry Shepard, a wonderful guy. Nat Shepard wasn't a wonderful guy. His brother was a wonderful guy. And Nat Shepard had come to me. He'd been a salesman for the Aero Press Company, which selling office supplies. He came to me and asked me what he could do. Well, I said, I've been noticing that the people that are in the specialty field are making a lot of money. Fellows that are selling Burroughs adding machines, the fellows selling Remington Wall bookkeeping machines, they're making big commissions. And I said, I've just written to the Cardex people. As I said, the son of the Rand Corporation has gone into business for himself selling Cardex visible equipment, which was nothing more or less than the overlapping cards which you could file in for quick reference, and then they were on a stand. And I said, I'm corresponding with them right now. And he said, let's see your correspondence. He said, I think I could go back there and tie this thing up. Well, I agreed. I said, if you can get the Cardex, and then we're trying for another adding machine where we're writing for them. And well, anyway, to make that story short, which could be prolonged over and over and over, we tied up together as a partnership. Then I went up to, he asked me to opening up, the war was just beginning to end, 1913. Well, no, it hadn't started. But the war was coming on. and things were starting to boom in many ways. I went up to Seattle and Portland, Oregon, left Merle home alone. I went up there to open up that territory for the Cardex people. I went into the Skinner and Eddy shipyard, and I was walking on cloud nine because I sold them thousands of dollars worth of equipment for their payroll alone, payroll record alone. Skinner and Eddy shipyard were building ships. As far as you could see up the sound, there were ships, thousands of men. And I sold them these visible cards for their payroll. Well, the Cardex people back in the East somewhere were so flooded with orders that they were a whole year behind in filling these things. So it didn't do me any good. And by the time they were ready to supply this stuff, Skinner and Eddy, the war was over. The Skinner and Eddy shipyards closed up. They didn't have them. But I did go down to Portland, and I sold the Ladin Tilton Bank, the Rasmussen Paint Company, and several others about $10,000 worth of merchandise. But I got 40%. So if I could have got the money, so I came down here, could this man had taken the money, he'd taken the commissions and put them in a bank. I had to sue him. I got judgment against him and never got a dime. That shepherd was a crooked me out of the hole.
Yeah.
Never got a dime. If it hadn't been for his brother Harry, who came and helped me out with some cash at that time, I couldn't have even gone. I don't know how we got by those few months. I really can't remember how we got by because I was out of work and didn't get a job. Then what did I do? Oh, then, golly sakes, what did I do then? When I quit, I came back from there, and I went to work for the Burroughs Adding Machine Company as B specialist. I was the one that developed what they call the SAP plan, the Simplified Accounting Plan. It was where you could. Well, that's another story. Oh golly. I was called their B specialist. I went in and wrote up the complete system for the CCMI. And I'll never forget, when I'd get it written up, it'd take me months. I went in to make a survey. I went and get them written up. When we went in, George Parrish, the manager, went in. We had the board of directors sit there. George Parrish sat down with me and listened while I presented the plan, the program, which was using Burroughs machines, of course. All of it was programmed around a Burroughs machine. And when I said it this way, one of the board of directors said, Mr. Romney, there was a fellow in Romney, was the office manager. Surely you don't do it that way. I was pointing out weaknesses, you see. And I said, well, this is the way Mr. Brain explained it to me. Brain was the brother to the Dr. Brain. He was their bookkeeper. So they called Brain in. And here's the manager of the office of the CCMI said it wasn't that way. And here Brain come in and said, yes, that's the way we're doing it. Well, that's right. The office manager wasn't familiar with the procedures that were going on. He was just sitting there letting, they were robbing the CMCMI blind. The system they had was so loose, was so sloppy. But I wrote the whole thing up. I wish I had it today. It was in a what do you call it, a manual, that thing, procedures. So I had that privilege of writing that up. And they never wanted me to quit the Burroughs either. Now, how I happened to quit the Burroughs, I was going around selling bookkeeping equipment, and I sold a Capital Garage, which was then owned by Gilbert Moyle and the Farrington brothers, who also had another garage, which they owned by themselves. They owned 50%. No, 49%, and Gilbert Moyle owned 51% of this particular garage. When I sold Gilbert Moyle, he was the manager, a bookkeeping machine with the simplified accounting plan that I developed. Well, you know, he couldn't master it. He couldn't figure it out. So they came to me one day and said, why don't you buy Farrington out and come in with us? It's a good deal. And they had this thing. So I said, I haven't got any money to buy Farringtons out. And so I learned that Farringtons owed Bennett Glass and Paint Company $1,500. And they couldn't pay it, and Bennett was pressing Farringtons to pay it. They weren't getting any money out of the Moyle interest because Gill was taking it all out in wages. So I went over to the Bennett Glass and Paint Company, and I talked to Billy Bennett, and I asked him if they would loan me the money to buy the Farrington interest in the Capitol garage, and I would pay them so much a month from the Capitol garage, which I did paid it all off. That's how I went in with the Moyle. And then as time went on, uh, we we had a fellow by the name of Bursley visit with us who was selling trucks. And he came in to interest us in being the agent for the United Motor Company. Well, to make that story short, we tied up with him and took on the truck agency, which meant, again, going into debt. Well, that went on for some time, Captain Motor Sales Company. Then we had a greasing and wash rack and storage. And we had a gasoline pump in the back. And of course, we could, those that came in, we'd sell gasoline and grease their cars in the back. The fellow by the name of, here's another interesting thing. The fellow by the name of Apperson came in. He represented the Standard Oil Company. He said, you're buying your gasoline from Bennett Glass and Paint Company, yes? You're getting a 2-cent margin, yeah? That's all we're getting. He said, you're very foolish. We can sell you in tank car lots, and you can get anywhere from the coast or the mid-continent. You can make anywhere from 6 to 14 and 15 cents on every gallon, easily. I said, well, that takes money. You have to buy a tank wagon, you have to have a tank storage, and you have to have a place to. He said, uh, I think if you can show them that you can buy this, you can go to your bank to borrow that kind of money. Well, I started to think about it. So I wrote up, by the way, this fellow's name was Apperson, but when he came in to talk to me, every time he came in, I couldn't remember his name. I couldn't remember his name. So I've been reading about this association, I forget one of the memory courses that we took at that time, by association. Well, we had an Apperson car, but the Apperson car had their symbol on their radiator as a jackrabbit. The jackrabbit was the symbol on the radiator cap. So I thought to myself, boy, I'll never forget that guy's name again. He'll be Apperson. Apperson. I'll think of the jackrabbit, and there's Apperson. Well, he came in one day, and I said, hello, Mr. Jackrabbit. I thought that this isn't much value there, but I got to thinking about it, so I wrote up a prospectus. I went to Mr. Moyle, Gilbert's father. Went down to his little cottage. I'll never forget it. Now, I've been taught in some of my selling courses, I take selling courses, that if you could get the individual's interest that you were talking to, you must get him to forget everything else. So he said, the nicest thing to do is put things in his hand, or if he's working at his desk, cover everything up. And I found that Beardsley, this truck salesman that I was talking to you about, when he'd go into a place, he had pictures. And if a man was looking over here at this or that, he covered it with his photographs, covered with that photograph. This guy couldn't look at anything but his pictures. And he was an excellent salesman. So I tried to get this prospectus that I'd put into a pamphlet form to Moyle. And he was sitting like this. And I went to hand it to him. Then I went to sit it on his lap, and he just let the thing fall down. Didn't work at all. So the prospectus went down. But I had shown him that for $9,600, I had got the price of $9,600, wherein I got the land developed, I got the tank, the line company to build a tank. We could put a tank on one of our own trucks. We had the trucks there. For $9,600, we could be in business. But the big thing was, I went to the Bennett Glass and Paint Company. I didn't tell them that we were going to. This is where I was I was a little shady. I didn't tell Bennett Glass and Paint Company that we were contemplating buying and tank car lots from the Standard Oil Company. I merely told them, I said, we want to put 2 pumps out in front. Well, now, they were very close friends to Chief Bywater, who was the chief of the fire department. Well, if you can imagine, I wrote a letter to the city commission of the fire department asking permission to install 2 pumps on State Street, just below First South, right where the federal building is now. We had it. I got permission. Bennett interceded for us with Bywater. Bywater learned finally that we were not going to buy from Bennett's, and he come over and tried to get me to ask for a rescinding of the permission. I said, no, we've got it. We're going to go ahead. We dug holes out in the street and put those great big tanks, big as your, and as big around as what you're sitting on there, your sofa. I don't know how many gallons, hold a tank wagon gallon. And we opened that place up, and we gave away so many quarts of oil for each 10 gallons of gas, and we had State Street blocked one night from I think around 6 o'clock to around 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. We had the whole street blocked. Can you imagine this? Well, I don't. So I was a little shady there, you see, but we did buy the tank. But now how we financed it? Well, finally, now what I wanted to do was increase the purchasing power and also the sales outlet for the Capital Motor Sales Company, which we already had, in which I owned 49%, Gilbert owned 51%. James H. Boyle and his brother and Henry, who became the apostle, came back to the idea that how much really cash did we need? We could, $4,600 would be half of what we needed, $4,600. So they would go down. We could put that money out as a cash down payment and pay the others in installment out of the earnings. This was their idea. But how would they do it? James H. Moore went down to the bank and endorsed our note, the Capital Garage note, on which Gilbert Moyle and I myself signed for the $9,600 direct to us. He merely endorsed it. They never put 5 cents in the Capital Gas Note Company, not a nickel in the Capital Gas Note Company. We paid that note off. Well, Gilbert Moyle expanded faster than you could say. Both in the trucks we got into hot water, and finally the Capital Motor Sales Company went into bankruptcy. But the Capital Gas and Oil Company, which should have been tied in with it, there's another story, Duane, should have been tied in with it, continued on. But I was kicked out when the Capital Motor Sales Company went broke. And I went out of there with just 1 10-cent piece in my pocket. And in the meantime, Wendell Allen, who had been financing the trucks under the name of the Western State Security Company, asked me, he said, you don't have to. You don't have to. But if I'd like you to come and help me liquidate this paper on the truck that you fellows sold us. So I went to work for him, and we opened up the Acme United Motor Company, and we did a big business for him a while. Well, that's another story. I could go on and on. It keeps on going, Duane. But I've missed a lot of links in this chain, a lot of links going back and forth. But now the Capital Motor Sales Company, the Capital Gas and Oil Company went on to sell out to the Phillips Petroleum Company. No, first the Phillips Petroleum Company. No, they sold out to the they invested their money that they got from the Utah Oil Refining Company. They got $350,000, of which $250,000 was clear. They took that money and invested with the Wasatch Oil Refining Company, which the McIntyres were the principal owners. Later on, that was sold to the Phillips 66, and James Boyle, who received my stock, in the Capital Gas North Company. That's the story I forgot to tell you. Builds this beautiful home up in Brighton County. He's a millionaire today on the stock that I originally held in the Capital Gas North Company. The way that happened was when they organized this thing. Well, the reason I told you the gas company was tied in with the motor sales company. We each were to relinquish Gilbert and I. By the way, there was a third party in there later. Come on, Ed Sheets was going to buy him. Gilbert and I were to release the going established business of the gas and oil company that we already had. See, and turn that over as our share. I would get a third. Gilbert would get a third. Moyle and Henry and Oscar Moyle would get a third. And so the Capital Gas and Oil Company was organized with 1/3 of the stock going to me, 1/3 of the stock going to Gilbert, 1/3 of the stock going to the other three. However, when the motor sales company was getting into hot water, Gilbert came to me and said, we could borrow some money over at the Utah State National Bank, but we've got to put up our stock for security in the Capital Gas and Oil Company. So I put my stock up at the Capital Gas and Oil Company over at the Utah State National Bank. And in addition to that, we put up all of the best paper we had on the selling, on the financing of trucks. The best paper we had where the payments were coming in, we took that over to the bank as part of the collateral. Well, when the Capital Motor Sales Company went broke, and I was kicked out, the Moyles continued with the Capital Gas and Oil Company. They walked in. The Utah bank served notice on me that I'd have to pick up the note, my portion of the note, and the Moyles confiscated my third of the stock, and that right there, they absolutely took it away from me, and Jimmy got it. I learned later on through Beardsley. This is another story. Went to California. That's a big story. I'm not going to tell you about it now. But I learned later on from him that when he talked to James H. Moyle, when he talked to Beardsley told me this story, so it's not secondhand. He said, well, Mr. Moyle said that soon as his boy Jimmy got out of college, he was going to take my place. Now that was, to me, I thought that was really unfair.
Trust them at all.
That was unfair.
That's where you made your big mistake.
Well, I've always trusted them.
Rotten,
No, I wouldn't say that. But their money was a cost.
say, listen, don't think I feel like I have to make.
Well, I'm going to quit now. You haven't got more room on that anyway.
Let's go, Dad.
But I've got many. I haven't. You see, I've only got a third of my life to you.
Yeah, it was.
Now,
Our expectation.
I've often thought, what a wonderful idea the old Spanish conquistadors had when they came over. What did they take up? They took up millions of acres, not a few hundred or 1,000. Whereas the darky says even more than that, 500.
Yeah.
But I've often wondered. Now, take the Catholics. When they came here, they took a 10. They had as much vision as Brigham Young did when he set out the Temple block, because they put their Holy Cross Hospital on a 10-acre block. They went up here on the mountain to open up that years and years before anyone went up there. That's the kind of vision you should have. The horizon should be way out there where you can't see it. You should never have a limit to your understanding what you want to do. And then I think if you got this dang thing on, turn it off for a minute. Turn it off.
We want to hear your wisdom.
Well, I wasn't going to let that. But I'll talk a little differently. Now you got me conscious of it.
Don't worry about that. Hey, let's go back to your dad. You told me a little bit about him last night, that he had a drinking problem. Were your parents always married? Did they divorce?
No, they never. My mother, I told you that my mother, in my estimation, was an angel in human form.
Kind of like mine.
Her love, yes. Her love surpasseth all understanding. She'd give her life. for her kids, but she'd rather live for them and struggle for them and help them. She'd rather do that than die for them. But at one time, my dad came home uh, under the influence of liquor in a very mean, ugly mood. And it was around about 11 o'clock at night. We were in bed. But he started throwing things around the house, a mean, ugly mood. And that's the way he would get when he'd get up to a certain point. Otherwise, he was the most friendly, loving guy in the world when he was sober that you ever saw. But liquor would make a demon out of him. So when he came home this night, Mother got a little frightened, and she got us all up. We all traipsed behind Mother over to a friend. We didn't have a telephone at that time, but Mother had a friend about a block and a half, 2 blocks away from us. Went over there and knocked on the door, and they were gracious to let us in. And while we were over there, I think my younger brother, Jack, who was maybe at that particular time just 4 or 5 years of age, started to cry. I don't think he was that old, maybe 2 or 3. Now, you see, Mother had 6 children, 3 girls and 3 boys. So this woman said, Anne, my mother's name was Anne, why don't you divorce that man? Why do you put up with him? And she said simply, I can't do that. He's the father of my children. That was all that she needed.
Were they married in the temple?
Huh? No. He's the father of my children. No, Dad could never have got a recommend for his drinking and his smoking. He never could have got it.
He started off the
You know, my dad, what do you want to know? I think he smoked a pipe, not cigarettes or cigars. He smoked a pipe. And I bet you that pipe he had must have been 25, 30 years old. And the bowl, he used to take horseshoe tobacco. I don't know whether you know what horseshoe tobacco is. Horseshoe tobacco is a pressed tobacco leaves into a plug. They call it a plug. And they take a knife, and it was a moist. It wasn't dried out like you find in the pouches in the regular pipe tobacco. And he'd take those little pieces and cut them in little pieces and put them in a pipe. Then it'd take for an age to get that thing going. But you know something? You could tell Dad was coming home a half a block away. That pipe was a smoking furnace, and it smelled to high, whatever you're going to go, high heaven or wherever you want to go, but it smelled terrible. So we asked my mother. But Dad, again, as I told you, you work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, month in and month out. And unless you've got a constitution beyond an ordinary mortal stamina, it takes something out of you. You can't help it.
When did he die? What were the circumstances?
About my dad in his last few months, or it might be about a year, lived with my sister Hannah, and he died there quite peacefully. The last year that he, of course, Mother preceded him in death about 4 or 5 years. And he hadn't worked for over a year. And during that last year, he didn't drink. He just lived there and retired, but he wasn't very old. He was only about 66, 67 when he died. Mother was only 47 when she died. Mother died, she would have turned 42nd, 40, she would have turned she'd been 42 years old, at her 42nd birthday on April 2nd. And she died March 27th, a few days before.
Her birthday is the same as yours?
Huh?
Her birthday is the same as yours?
And I celebrated my 18th birthday on that same the same day that she was buried on April 1st. So I celebrated my 18th birthday the day after she was buried. And there was another thing that happened about Mother. When I don't think these should be historical, but they hit me. I had to take charge of the funeral. No one else was. She had the funeral over in the old 12th Ward meeting house, which today is torn down. And it was raining. And I walked up and down to see that the cortege was being properly taken care of. And we went up to the city cemetery, and she buried just this side of 11th Avenue, right almost in the center street. But while we were up there, they found out that they had dug the wrong grave on the wrong lot, on the wrong side of the street even. We had to wait in that storm, and it was raining. I want to tell you, everybody was soaked. It was raining, and of course, they didn't have all automobiles for everybody like they did now, like they do now. They were crowded in, I guess, in a few automobiles and even in the hearse, waiting for that new grave to be dug. And you know, the two men, it takes quite a little while with picks and shovel to make a 6-foot depth hole big enough to take a coffin. We waited there. And I've often wondered what Mother's spirit was going through while that was taking place. If the spirit hovers around until the mortal remains are finally disposed of, I don't know.
She was probably pretty nervous.
I hope not. I hope she was there doing something better than that.
That's something.
Huh?
That's something. An interesting aspect.
Oh, that was terrible. That was a terrible ordeal.
But
Now I had
what did she die of? Did she have a?
No, today they could have, they called it dropsy at that time. Of course, she had really, it would be a heart failure because water would accumulate in the extremities, her lower extremities, and gradually build up. And she gradually built up, and they called it dropsy. She really drowned internally. I really believe that's what happened. She just drowned because she swelled right up. And then gangrene, mother died a long, lingering death. A long, never complained. Never complained. I had diphtheria in January of the same year, that year in which she died. I had diphtheria, and we were quarantined. So there was no one in the house but Mother and myself. Not a soul. Mother took care of me all the way up till about February 1st. And we were living upstairs over a little apartment over the markets down on the street. And the entrance had to be from the back, and it was a stairway. Now imagine she had to go down that stairway and up that stairway to get things because it couldn't be delivered to the door. They had a big yellow sign, quarantine, scarlet, diphtheria. And the only person that came was Dr. T. George Odell, the son of this fellow Odell that I told you about, the Consolidated Wagon Machine Company. And Dr. Seymour B. Young, the father of Edgar, what's his name?
S. Dilworth Young.
Dilworth Young, and his older brother that was the president of the 70s. Levi Edgar Young. And he came over. And he drove at that time, Dr. Young, Seymour Young, used to drive a little wagon. You could, if you see a picture today of that little canopy over a carriage top and the single horse, driving along, that's the way Seymour B. Young went with that at that time. So now then, February, Mother started to go down fast. She held up till the quarantine was lifted, and I was well. Then she went down very, very fast, very fast. And by March 27th, she passed away that same year. All of that happened in those 3 months.
Now, what was her birthday?
April 2nd.
April 2nd. So she was just almost.
And I was born on April 2nd. Now, let's see. I'd have to do a little figuring to find out what year she was born. I've got it on the genealogical record.
Yeah.
But if I'm 18, I was born in 1889. So we add 18 to 89. So that'd be 1907, wasn't it? 1987. So that'd be 1907. When she died. So if she was 47 years old in 1907, She was born then in 1860.
Did she always have the Danish accent?
No, mother spoke English fluently. Read, she could speak Danish, and you see, my grandfather, my mother's father, was a soldier in the old Danish army and was wounded at the time the Germans went in there and took Schleswig-Holstein. And at that particular time, there was a German family there. So my mother talked German almost as good as she could Danish. So she talked German, Danish, understood French. She was quite a linguist, and she was a neighborhood interpreter. Anyone come in there that couldn't speak English, she'd go over there and interpret for them. The Swedish, the Norwegians, the Danes, the Germans, the whole works.
But she didn't have an accent at all.
Not an English accent, not a Danish accent in her English. None of that. No, no one would know. Some people thought she was a Southerner.
Did you know your grandparents?
Very well. I lived with them. My granddad, Petersen, in my estimation, one of the greatest men that ever lived. Not that he made any money, but within the economy in which he lived, Blaine, he was absolutely independent. Absolutely independent. When he came to Utah, he was very faithful when he came. He was finally was ordained a high priest, Grandpa. Very good church, very good temple work, both Grandma and Grandpa. Did a lot of temple work. And when he came here, he and his sons built the little house that they had over the Jordan River, just south of 4th South Street, wherein he had 2 pigs always. He had been a butcher over in Denmark, so he always had meat. He had 2 pigs, always had 2 Jersey cows, and had a horse and an express wagon. They planted 6 little trees to the north of their home, in which they had cherries, apples, and plums, I think. And from that, Grandma used to put up all the preserves. They had a little berry patch in which they had red berries, currant berries, and so forth, which Grandma always put up her own fruit. We churned all our own butter, made all our own cheese, and of course we had eggs galore. So used to take the milk around to the neighborhoods and pour it out of one can into another bucket for them and get a nickel for it. It'd be about 1.5 quarts they'd get for a nickel. And then we'd take the egg. Now, the only thing I never saw any money. Grandpa would have any money. I know he had some, but I never saw him use it. But I used to take eggs, a bucket of eggs. Huh?
Where is she, down here?
What's she doing? What's she doing? Turn this off. So I used to take.
Finish telling Margaret.
So I used to take this, the bucket of eggs and maybe 4 or 5 pounds of butter over to the store and trade it for sugar and coffee. Now, my granddad had been a snuff user over in Denmark and a wine drinker. He drank a lot of wine. He gave those 2 up, but they couldn't give their coffee up. Now, that coffee was different than any coffee you ever smelled or looked at or tasted by anybody. They had a coffee pot, and in the coffee pot, they had a little cloth bag that was suspended by a little wire string from the upper perimeter around the top of the coffee pot. And it was on the stove all the time. And when the water went down in the coffee pot, more water was poured in that bag, but another spoonful of coffee would go in. The old bag wouldn't go off till the following morning. Then the bag was empty. That bag was yellow, with age. And you could smell that coffee a block away, too. But as far as the people were concerned, there were never a more grand couple in the world. And when Grandpa died in his sleep, and Grandma woke up and said his arm was over my chest, and I had a time getting it off and tried to wake him, and I couldn't wake him. Well, the funeral was held. It was a lovely funeral from the meeting house out there in their ward. I don't know what ward it was called in. And when we went to the graveyard, At that particular time, they lowered the coffin, and you waited until they put the filled it up and put the flowers on. You didn't go away. So when that first shovel hit, and that thud of that first shovel full of dirt hit the the container of the coffin, that board, what do we call it? Uh, Grandma turned to me and she says, I had her holding her arm. She said, "What are we doing up here, Ray? I've got to get home and get Grandpa's dinner." And she lived in the past from then on. She never lived in Grandpa's house. They moved over to Aunt Mary's in about 8 years.
How long, I mean, when did you live with them and for how long?
Oh, I lived with her off and on from the time I was about 3 years of age to go down and live with Mama. Then I was with him when I was 6 years of age. I was with him when I was 8 years of age. Back and forth. I stayed a week, maybe 2 weeks. What did they say about Mother? It was wrong. Even if he'd gone through it. And they'll work for it.
Hey, tell me, I've got this thing going again. Tell me what you remember about Grandma's parents.
Have you got the story now? Well, I can tell you this, that they were, in my estimation, wonderful people. The story about Grandma and Grandpa is something I think you should get from your grandma. They were the first couple to be married in the Logan Temple. Your grandma, or your great-grandpa, your great-grandma. Mother's Meryl, father, my mother. The first couple to be married in the Salt Lake Temple.
The Logan Temple.
Logan Temple. And
Who performed
he was the oldest son and the youngest wife, but you all know this is all in the history.
Yes.
And he was quite a stock man, a horseman. He was an authority on horses. I didn't meet him, of course, until he's been married many years. They'd had 6 children. I married him.
Well, did he raise horses for?
Well, he had a livery stable in which he had horses.
Where was the livery?
Merle was your grandma was an excellent horseman.
Where was the livery stable?
It was called the Iowa Livery Stable on South Temple, and then they moved down on State Street at one time. What's that one place?
Iowa?
Called the Iowa Livery Stable.
Iowa?
Iowa. I-O-W. Why was that? I don't know. But I was looking up in the old directories way back in 1889, to see where I was born, where they lived. So I came on down through, and I found out that the Taylors were, he bought into some merchandising outfit, I forget what it was, and had a livery stable near about where the old Congress Hotel that burned down. They had a livery stable there. I forget what that was called. Then he had one between West Temple and First West. West Temple is not called West Temple and First West. It's First West inland.
Yeah, First
100 and 200. We've got to put that way. Well, anyway, it was between West Temple and on the south side of the street. And he ran maybe 15, 16 horses.
Did he have a ranch someplace where he raised them?
No.
Everything was in town.
As far as I know, of course, the Taylors had the old gentleman, your great-great-great-granddad, John Taylor, the father, had a big place down there. He had that section almost from 17th south to 21st south, from 7th east up to 8th east. That was all Taylor property.
Or was it? Just this side of Brigham Young's property, huh?
What?
Just north of Brigham Young's.
Where did Brigham Young have his?
No, Brigham Young's was there.
His was 21st south to 27th south.
Well, yes, that was 21st to 17th.
Yeah.
And from 7th east over to, you see, that's where Uncle Frank was on the corner. And then Aunt Letty was here, and then there was over, and then they had the others were over on that side of the street. I forget who they all were. But you get that record from Meryl.
Well, that home, there's that home on 17th South and 7th East, that big gray home that belonged to one of the Taylors.
Where?
17th South and 7th East, behind that
No,
station.
that's on 27th or 33rd.
No,
Well, if you know, it's on 33rd. It's on 33rd or 27th.
27th. It's on 27th.
27th, yeah. That's John W.
That was John W.'s home, wasn't it?
That was John W.
Yeah, he had a lot of homes.
He was broke one minute and a millionaire the next.
Was Ebenezer quite stable in his affairs?
What?
Was Grandma's father quite stable in his affairs, Ebenezer Taylor?
Oh, yes. But they were all promoters.
Were they?
All the Taylors. None of them worked at anything at all. I don't know how much education they had. I haven't the least idea, but I don't think Merle.
Why were they promoters?
I think it was in the blood. What makes a promoter?
Okay.
I don't know. I think there's something. I think they have a sort of a peculiar instinct for sensing that this can go, that can go. My son Dick's a promoter, nothing but a promoter.
Uh-huh.
He loves to do it. I don't. I couldn't tell you much about him except as I say I know this much about him. I know how he lost his money.
Ebenezer?
Yeah, know how that Ebenezer lost his money. He was pretty well fixed when I first met him. When Merle was about 16, I was about 18. He used to contract to supply forces for the government and for the army. And he'd bid. But in these bids, there were various stipulations that required them to have the horses at a certain point for inspection, that they had to measure up to certain standards, and so on and so forth. And he seemed to be able to get by and make more money. He'd buy, Broncos out here for $10 and sell them to the government for 50 and 60.
Mm-hmm.
I know that. Well, then they got a big contract for polo horses to go over to the Philippines. These polo horses, I read the contract at the time. I thought it was, even if it was little as I knew them, I was just a young man. I thought they were, that the government was imposing almost impossible terms. He had to have the horses at these what they call these remount stations for inspection, and those that were accepted had to be ready to sail on a boat from San Francisco by such a time. And if he failed, the government had the privilege to go out in the open market, buy them anywhere they could, and at any price they felt, the price, the going price, and charge him the difference. Well, that was a terrible contract, but he felt confident he could do it. Well, he used to go up, he started around in Baker, Oregon. They come right on over down through Boise over to Pocatello, and they put him on the train. The first inspection, I think they took one. They accepted one horse. They did the same thing all they went through. He had his cowboys rounding up these horses, getting there, putting them in the corral, bring them over and have them inspected. The government turned them down one by one. Now you won't like to hear what I'm going to tell you. And I think the reason for it is, in these previous contracts, when Mr. Taylor would go down to San Francisco, he'd wine and dine the officers down there and possibly slip a little under the table. This time, I think the government realized that going on, and they broke him. They deliberately broke him. I can't see any way out of it, because they could have passed some of this. No question about it.
Yes, I do.
But when he got through, and they billed him for the difference, and the bonding company had to make good. I had was bonded. He was broke.
How old was he at this time?
And I don't think the other fellow ever came back from that. Well, I don't know. I'm 18. And he would have been married. He had Arida, who was a little older than I was. She was 20. How old? Maybe he was around 25 when he got married. Maybe around 50, 60.
Was he with
Young, comparatively young man.
How long did he live?
I don't know. We got to get that from Jenny Lush.
And he died. Do you remember when he died?
He died down in California from cancer.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, no, there's so many things when you go to get a history of an individual. I think to talk at random this way doesn't give you the facts.
Well, I'll give you some idea.
But he was up here. He was up here in this area, and a man went ahead of him somewhere, as they tell the story, crossing a creek or going through some. And as he went through, and he let go, Grandpa was right behind him, he let go of this limb, and the limb swung back and hit him right on the bridge of the nose, smashed it. He didn't pay any attention to it. And a cancer developed there, and that man died in misery. Absolute misery.
The cancer in the nose?
Cancer, what it spread into his eye. I used to see him, when he lived with us, put what they call arsenic of lead in these things. He thought that would slow it up. And it was a very slow growing cancer. Aged his eye out, aged his nose off, went back into his brain. And he died down in California with his daughter Elise. And he just said when he died, he screamed, died from pain. Why they just give him something? Now, this is the story I get.
Yeah.
You have to have it corroborated.
Did he wear any kind of a mask or covering to hide his face?
No, not toward the end. Maybe he did. I don't think he did toward the end because I didn't see him the last year. I didn't see him for a while. But when he was with us, I used to feel so sorry for him. He was such a gentleman. Never took place. He never sat down with. You'd never see him dressed like you and I. Never. He was always an immaculately dressed gentleman. And when he'd sit down at the table, his cuffs would come out about that far, all stiffly starched, his collar stiffly starched, and he would sit there, just like the Lord of the Manor, you know. And his wife would come over to pour his coffee or anything else. He had a thumb, I believe it was that long. And he'd just sit there, never say a word. He'd go. So that was enough. That was enough. And she got the signal. She got the signal.
Everyone is so.
But I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to tell you much about this, and I wouldn't want you to record what I've told you about it, because I think Meryl could give you a much better. And there's no one alive today outside of Meryl and her brother. Her brother is much younger. That could give you much of a story.